Howdy folks, and welcome to the Hillbilly Kitchen. Well, the holidays are almost here and it's time to start baking. So today we're going to make a homemade pie crust. Making a pie crust is pretty simple, and you don't really need any special equipment. You can mix it by hand with just a fork or use a cheapy dough blade or something. If you've got a food processor or a stand mixer or something like that, though, you can certainly mix it in a mixer, and I'm using a stand mixer today. But what we need is 2 cups of all-purpose flour, and I'm kind of a lazy baker. I don't sift mine. I just bust it up a little bit with a fork, make sure there's no big lumps or anything in it. And you need a teaspoon of salt, so I'm going to go ahead and dump my salt in my flour. Now you want to make sure your ingredients for your pie crust are cold. And I'm using butter in mine. I would not recommend using margarine in this. I don't know if you know about margarine, if you've heard about it or not, but it was marketed as a healthy alternative to butter. And it really is not. What it is a whole bunch of chemicals. So if you're not going to use butter, you can use Crisco. But I prefer the butter. It's more natural, more healthy than even the Crisco, and it gives it a better taste. You want to make sure your butter is cold. And I'm using 2/3 of a cup of butter here, and I've cut it up in little pieces. It makes it easier to mix, and it doesn't matter if you're mixing by hand or if you're using a stand mixer or a food processor. You want to cut your butter up, and you want to make sure it's really cold. And we're going to need some ice water. We're going to add between 7 and maybe 9 tablespoons of ice water, but we will add the ice water a little bit at a time after we start mixing it. So I'm going to take this over to the stand mixer and we're going to mix it. I'm going to kind of pour the flour in first. And then before I turn the mixer on, I'm going to add in my butter and kind of make sure it gets coated with the flour as I'm adding it. That way I don't have the whole 2/3 of a cup of butter stuck together in one big chunk that my mixer has to mix up. This recipe will make 2 9-inch pie shells or 1 double crust. And if you're making a whole bunch of pies, I don't really recommend mixing up all your pie crusts at one time. It's just too much dough to work with. And you do have to keep pie crust cold when you're working with it, or it gets super sticky and you can't roll it out. You end up having to add more flour, and that changes the texture and the taste. So kind of limit yourself to a recipe about this size, and do them 2 crusts at a time. Now you can certainly mix them up ahead of time, and like if I was making 6 or 8 crusts, I wouldn't have to clean my mixer out every time in between crusts. Just mix them separate. Okay. And I'm going to start this on low because flour will fly all over the kitchen if I don't. Okay, you just want to let your mixer run or your food processor or whatever, and it is faster in a food processor, or if you're mixing it by hand, you want to continue to mix until it's gravelly looking, almost like sand, and all that flour and butter are mixed together. We're getting close, but not quite yet. Okay, you can see here it's pretty fine. The butter is causing some little pieces to stick together, but I don't have any big chunks of butter left in there. And that's what you want. And then we're just going to turn it back on and add the water 1 tablespoon at a time. Okay, that was 6 tablespoons of water, and you can see that it's starting to stick together. Now you're not going to actually make a dough that would look like a biscuit dough or something, a bread dough even. You want it crumbly, but when it'll stick together like that, when you can squeeze it with your fingers, that's enough water. So you want to put this in the refrigerator for at least 30 minutes before you roll it out. An hour's better, and you can store it in the refrigerator for a couple weeks. Like if you wanted to make all of your pie crust dough a week before Thanksgiving, you could certainly do that, and it would be fine stored in the refrigerator until you were ready to roll it out and bake your pies. If you've got room, you can even roll it out and store it on some saran wrap or between wax paper or something rolled out and store it in your refrigerator that way. But what I'm going to do is just take me a piece of plastic wrap. I hate this stuff. I prefer wax paper for almost everything, but for pie crust this does seem to work a little bit better. And if you're making a lot of them, like I said, for Thanksgiving or Christmas or any kind of a big dinner, easier is better. And I'm just going to turn all of my pie crust dough out on this. Oops. And I'm going to kind of mash it together. I know that looks a little crumbly, but that's exactly what you want, because after it sits in the refrigerator for a while and you get ready to roll it out, it'll roll out good, and it is sticking together nice. And it'll kind of form together while it's sitting in the refrigerator resting for a few minutes too. Once you get it in your saran wrap, you can take it like this and squeeze it a little bit more and kind of stick it together a little better, and that'll make it easier to roll out once you take it out of the refrigerator. Okay, now I'm just going to stick this in the refrigerator, and we'll be back in about 30 minutes or so and roll it out. And we're actually going to bake it in this video for like a cream pie or something. But if you were using it for a fruit pie, apple, pumpkin, pecan, something like that, you would use it like this and put it in your pie shell. But we'll be back. My pie crust has been in the refrigerator for about 30-45 minutes now. And I'm going to divide it in half, but I've got to have a little bit of flour down to roll it out in. And I put down a piece of saran wrap or plastic wrap on here. If you have ever had a pie crust, made a homemade pie crust, and then had it break up while you were trying to put it in the pan, you know how frustrating that can be. If you put down some plastic wrap, it's not necessarily going to keep the mess from happening, but you'll be able to put your pie plate over top of your crust, wrap the plastic wrap around it, and then flip it over, and that way you don't have to worry about your crust breaking up while you're trying to lift it into your pan. So just a little tip. And I am going to divide this in half, and I'm going to put the other half back in the refrigerator because I only need half of it today. I still made the double crust recipe because it is a little bit of trouble to make it. And like I said, I can keep this in the refrigerator for a week or two and use it later. But that's about half right there. Now I also put my rolling pin in the refrigerator. If you have a bowl, or not a bowl, if you have a board, just a big cutting board or maybe even a marble board or something, you can put that in the refrigerator and get it cold, and it will help keep your pie crust from sticking to the rolling pin, to the board. It'll help keep it from melting and getting soggy. I'm going to kind of shape this round before I start rolling it. And I want to kind of rub just a little bit of flour on my rolling pin. Not much is going to stick to it. Now when you roll out your pie crust, you want to go from the center out every single time. That kind of helps make it round. You're still going to have to shape the edges, or at least I do. And you want to roll it until it gets down to about 1/8 of an inch thick. Alright, when you think you've got your pie crust rolled out pretty close, check it, and it should be about 1 inch bigger than your pie plate all the way around. I've got pretty close to that with a few little pieces missing, but that's okay, because if you have a little piece missing, or if you have a tear, you can always patch it with an extra piece from around the edge. And that's a lot easier than trying to pick up that very thin pie crust and put it in the pie dish. Every time I try that, I rip it in half. You want to take your fingers and kind of press your crust down in your pie plate. And it fits pretty good. Kind of work the air out, because you don't want any huge pockets of air down in the edges. And you just want to take your fingers and kind of go around the edge and pinch the edge of the pie crust. Now, if you were filling this with an apple pie filling, pumpkin pie, pecan pie, anything like that, you might want to put it back in the refrigerator for just a few minutes. And let it get really cold again. That'll kind of help keep it from getting soggy. Now, anything extra, we're just going to take our fingers and kind of mash it off the edge. But if you're using it for a cream pie, chocolate cream, coconut cream, banana cream, butterscotch, any kind of like pudding pie type thing, you're going to bake it first. And I said you do want to preheat your oven, and we're going to bake it at 375 until it's brown. And I don't know exactly how long that'll take. It's kind of like adding the water. It depends on the temperature of the ingredients, how much water you put in it. It depends on the humidity, just like adding the water depends on the humidity and the temperature of the ingredients. Just kind of keep an eye on it and let it cook until it's brown. And there's a lot of fancy ways to crimp the edges of your pie crust. You can even buy tools. But what my mom and all my aunts and my granny did is they just took a fork and went around the edge and kind of mashed it down and made the little fork pattern in the edge. Not sure why they didn't. I mean, my dad, he worked as a baker for a while, and he always pinched it with his fingers and made the little ripples like in it. But you want to make sure that you poke it with a fork and put holes all in the bottom. If you don't, it'll get air bubbles in it, bubble up off the bottom of your pan. It maybe even bust up, but you won't be able to put your filling in it. And get your fork holes kind of up in that crease there too. Make sure you poke it full pulling out the air bubbles. And really work your way around it good. And like I said, there's tools you can get and stuff to make the edges fancy, but you can do the ripples with your finger, or you can do the fork around the edge. And if it tears, it's not a big deal. Just take a little piece and patch it. But we're going to put this in our oven, 375, preheated, and we'll be back to see what it looks like when it's brown. Okay, our pie crust has been in the oven about 20 minutes or so, and it's ready to take out now. You can see it's lightly brown, not too much. You don't want to burn it, you just want to get it done. And you can tell it is done because the edges are nice and crispy. And it pulled off the side of my pie plate over here just a little bit. I don't know why it pulled off one side, not the other one. Let it cool a little bit, and it's ready for your favorite cream pie filling. Chocolate cream pie, lemon meringue, coconut cream, butterscotch pies, all that kind of stuff. Like I said, if you're doing it for a fruit pie like apple or pecan, pumpkin pies even for Thanksgiving, you don't bake it first. You just roll it out, put it in the pie shell, then add your filling. But for cream pies, you do want to bake it. You want to get it nice and crispy around the edge. And this recipe will give you a really tasty buttery pie crust. And it is not a pie crust where people will pick the pie out of the center of the pie crust and leave the pie crust laying on the plate. They'll eat the pie crust and the pie. So if you've got the time this year at Thanksgiving, make your homemade pie crusts. They'll really impress people, and they definitely make a tasty pie. Thanks for joining us in the Hillbilly Kitchen. Don't forget to click like and subscribe before you leave, and we'll see you next time.